Dr. Sarah Font. Dr. Font is a former caseworker in Child Protective Services in Michigan. She's been an academic researcher in Wisconsin, Texas, and Pennsylvania. She has a PhD in social welfare from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's also a faculty member with me at Penn State. And her research expertise is in child protection in the foster care system, and she's also a foster parent, which makes her a unicorn.
Thank you, Jenny. So, as Jenny mentioned, I have sort of a unique perspective, having seen the system from multiple angles. And this has allowed me to sort of observe and participate in a system that's complex, rarely transparent, and highly criticized. And even though there's lots of decentralization across states and counties, the issues I highlight today are all too common across the country. So in my time today, I will highlight the ways in which the current system fails to ensure safety, but we need not resign ourselves to the status quo. The federal government has an opportunity to encourage and support states in their efforts to select, implement, and evaluate evidence-based prevention services and to ensure that those services reach families in most need. So, as you know, the CPS system is largely tasked with determining whether child maltreatment has occurred and is responsible for intervening only when a caseworker can prove that maltreatment occurred. Yet, an investigative CPS report, even if the allegations were not proven to be true, is a consistent and significant predictor of future maltreatment allegations and negative life outcomes for children. Some families with unfounded allegations return to the system again and again until tragedy occurs. A few months into my time as a CPS investigator in Michigan, I was sent to the hospital to meet a toddler, we'll call her Nina, whom doctors had suspected had been physically abused. As it turned out, her mother, frustrated and exhausted by Nina's crying, had shaken her and thrown her on a hard tile floor, causing her brain to bleed and swell. Yet, Nina's abuse was neither inevitable nor shocking, considering her past. A few months prior, Nina's mother had been investigated for perpetrating domestic violence while Nina was in the home. At that time, numerous risk factors were already known for child maltreatment. Nina's mother was only 17 years old and pregnant with her second child. She herself had been maltreated as a child. She was impoverished, socially isolated, had mental health concerns, and had perpetrated violence on at least one known occasion. Yet, because there was no substantiated evidence that Nina herself had witnessed the domestic violence or had at that time been demonstrably harmed, the case was closed without any further services provided. That case sticks with me, not because it's unusual, but because it isn't. The majority of children and families contacted by CPS receive no services, despite high risk of recurrent CPS involvement. The current CPS system only has the capacity to prioritize immediate safety and is therefore crisis-oriented. To analogize, imagine that you went to the doctor and through testing it was determined that you had stage 1 cancer. Then imagine that instead of providing specialized services such as radiation treatment or chemotherapy or surgery, you were sent home and told, come back when you have incurable stage 4 cancer. In many ways, this is how the Child Protective Services system operates today, with all too regular tragic consequences for children and families. Roughly 40% of referrals are never investigated, and another 80% of investigations are unfounded. There's a lot of factors that contribute to this, including a lack of time or expertise by caseworkers to conduct high-quality investigations. Regardless, children with unsubstantiated allegations remain at high risk of future maltreatment and poor social, economic, and psychological outcomes. And the Child Protective Services system infrequently and inconsistently provides services to mitigate risk. There are many reasons that services are often not provided in these unsubstantiated cases, including a lack of resources to purchase services, long wait lists for specialized services such as substance abuse treatment, difficulty engaging parents' interests. Another, less discussed barrier is perceived responsibility. When CPS declares that there are no immediate safety threats, CPS can offer preventive services, but it has no mandate to do so. Some would argue that this is justified because resources, including services, should be targeted towards those at highest risk. Yet, families who are initially deemed low risk can become high risk if their problems go unaddressed. Indeed, half of children identified as maltreatment victims were investigated previously. Early use of evidence-based services may prevent families' risk from escalating, thereby reducing the need for later intensive and involuntary interventions. To be clear, children who have been exposed to maltreatment can have healthy and productive futures and grow into responsible and productive citizens. But with a CPS system that lacks evidence-based direction, as well as the necessary resources to prevent future maltreatment, we should not be surprised when those children suffer adverse effects as adults and bring with them deeply troubling and disruptive spillover effects to society. However, simply offering services is not enough. Many of the services offered by various levels of the CPS system are not supported by empirical evidence, and the metric of success is often participation rather than meaningful changes in parents' behavior, resources, capacities, or outcomes. I learned this lesson the hard way. One of my last cases at CPS involved a family reported for something pretty commonplace, a newborn with a positive drug screen. My investigation identified some additional indications of neglect, and there was a family history of domestic violence and parental substance abuse. Those factors, though concerning, were not severe enough to demonstrate a need to remove the children on an emergency basis. So instead, I requested the most intensive family preservation services we could offer at the time. A service provider that worked with the family one-on-one every day for a month. At the time, I didn't know whether the service was evidence-based. I didn't know if it was effective. I didn't know if there were alternatives to that program outside of the system. But it didn't matter, because to my knowledge, there were no other options for family preservation services. So when the service provider had completed the required 30 days of service and was ready to close the case, I believed that the children were safe and that we had effected a positive change with that family. A week later, I saw a dead child for the first time. The child had died from asphyxiation. She had been left in a swing where she had to hold up her head to breathe, and she wasn't able to. By the time the parents, who were high at the time, checked on her, her body was cold. Had I been able to provide services tailored to her family's needs and circumstances, rather than a generic intervention, without demonstrated effectiveness in treating parental substance abuse and neglect, she might have lived. Today, she'd be in 3rd grade, like my eldest foster daughter, learning multiplication and cursive writing. Versions of these tragedies play out every day across the country and around the world. As a caseworker, I could always tell which children had been the subject of a prior unsubstantiated investigation. When I went to interview them, they were neither surprised nor scared, but rather resigned to the idea that nothing would change, that no one was coming to help. And now, when I tell my 2 foster daughters that they are safe and protected, I understand why they are skeptical. But there are opportunities to build a more effective and efficient system. With targeted intervention and investment in evidence-based programming, data-driven technical assistance, and evaluation, we can improve the system's effectiveness and efficiency. The time is now. We shouldn't have to rehash the same problems a decade from now. To prevent maltreatment and its recurrence, we must orient Child Protective Services to be a system that reduces risk rather than reacts to harm. Thank you.